Today I'm going to be talking with Ralph White and Walter Alexander, and we are doing this seminar, a month-long seminar on Rudolf Steiner that starts on Sunday. And it's a little bit unique because we're going to be doing it both in person at the beautiful Rudolf Steiner. What is it called? Rudolf Steiner Foundation, Rudolf Steiner Institute, or Rudolf Steiner Center?
It's the society. It's the Anthroposophical Society of New York.
Yeah. So it's a beautiful old building, which really has the Steiner vibe. And we'll also have a live Zoom from there. And then on Wednesdays, we'll be doing a Q&A session, which I think will just be on Zoom. I don't think we'll be in the same school.
That's what I'm thinking.
We'll create a bit of an internet community for it. So at the moment, we're sort of waiting for Walter to find us again. But Ralph, maybe you want to just talk for a minute about kind of your long-term relationship with Steiner, why you think he's so valuable, and so on. And then hopefully Walter will jump back up.
Yeah, happy to. Well, I'm really happy that we're able to talk about Rudolf Steiner, really one of the most remarkable figures of the 20th century, who's remains still not as widely known as he might be. I just came back from Switzerland from actually being at the Goetheanum outside Dornach, the great building in honor of Goethe, the German poet, statesman, and scientist that Steiner created there. That is a center for anthroposophical work. But yeah, I mean, if we think of somebody through the legacy, hey, Walter.
Hey, Ralph.
I was glad you're there. I'm just talking a little bit about Rudolf Steiner and what he was. And I was just remarking about a good way to judge people is by the legacy they left. And in terms of the fruits that Rudolf Steiner's work has left behind, and we think of the biodynamic agriculture, the big role in the rebirth of organic agriculture. We think of the initiative and holistic education, Waldorf schools, now worldwide. And we can also think of the special needs Camp Hill villages all over the world that deal with children and adults with special needs, not to mention many other areas. So, not to mention the 6,000 lectures on profound spiritual, philosophical, esoteric matters. So, anyway, we're going to, the three of us, very happy that we're able to do this, Daniel and Walter. This partnership between the New Center for Holistic Learning, which is succeeding the Open Center that I co-founded many years ago, plus Walter Alexander here from the Anthroposophical Society. And of course, many thanks to Daniel, who's the only one with the tech smarts to pull this off among the three of us. But I'm very glad we're doing it.
So for anybody who's listening and they want to learn about the course, it's you can learn about it at liminal.news. And if you want to join, you can use the coupon code AwakeningSoul for 25% off the full price. I mean, you mentioned what's very extraordinary about Steiner, who was this like Austrian occult visionary, I think lived from like 16, 1925, something like that.
Right.
He had this incredible legacy that continues to this day with the schools and the agriculture and other elements of his legacy, but and obviously the movement itself, anthroposophy, but also what most people don't really know about, which I think is going to be kind of like the focus for us, is his occult philosophy, which is incredibly elaborate and incredibly profound. And I know about it to a certain degree, but I think you guys know more about it. Maybe particularly Walter, Walter, you can introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your involvement with Steiner. But Walter is in deep in the trenches of the Steinerian ethos and worldview and metaphysics and so on. So it's going to be fun to to sort of like bandy this stuff around for a month with you guys.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Ralph. I'm been an anthroposophist for quite some time. I've been the program director and facilitator at Philosophy NYC, which is both down in Chelsea. And the question is, why is this moment particularly important 100 years after Steiner's death? and I think a lot of things you mentioned, and I on my list here had forgotten to put in the Campbell movement, which is really extraordinary, which is the care of children and adults with special needs. But there's been an increase in recognition by non-philosophists. Ralph, you're kind of hybrid, I would say.
Yes,
In your heart, you've always been one, you know. And now you've been to the Goethe what, twice?
Yeah, twice.
Last year, I think I think you're finished. You know.
I'm ready to go back.
And
maybe for people who don't know, which is probably most people listening, the Goetheanum is a structure that Rudolf Steiner designed in Switzerland. There's actually like a whole town which has, I mean, along with being this crazy visionary and having this cult philosophy and practice, he also explored architecture and design and art. And so he'd actually designed, I think, a wooden version of this structure, which is kind of like their center, maybe the cathedral in a way, which burned down during the last years of his life. And then he designed this new structure, which is made of stone. And I also visited it many years ago, and I was blown away. It's pretty extraordinary. But yeah, Walter, I turned it back to you. I just want to make sure people have a little bit of context.
So anyway, there's been increasing recognition among some non-anthroposophists of Steiner's important role. I mean, for example, recently there was this piece in the Gagosian Gallery newsletter. I forget the guy who wrote it. But he pointed out the important influence that Steiner had on Joseph Beuys, Kandinsky, especially Hilda af Klimt. And but at the end of the article, which explored this huge influence in the modern arts, he said the remarkable thing is that no one knows Steiner's name. How did he have all this influence and yet remain kind of invisible himself? And I think that was, that's interesting in itself. His modesty, his humility. And now we have this Harvard Kennedy School conference in the middle of December. Daniel McCannon, I think, is the organizer. There's 75 papers being presented, and lots of discussion, and it's a new moment in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I guess. Yeah, I mean, it's part of my fascination with him is over the last 50 years or maybe more, 70, there's been a huge revival of kind of esotericism in the West and huge interest in Eastern metaphysics and Tibetan Buddhism and Sufism and Kabbalah and so on. Well, I guess that's kind of Western, but yeah, and then kind of like yoga obviously exploded, but often it's felt like kind of the particular kind of like Western, like esoteric, even esoteric Christian kind of like aspect of the sort of tradition has been of less interest to people. And people have been more interested in the East or the Southern, the indigenous and so on. And for me, like I see Steiner and in a way Carl Jung as kind of like the great kind of Western European shamans of the 20th century. And Jung is also much, I would say, better known than Steiner. And in some of my writing, I've really tried to map their ideas kind of onto each other and so on. Both of them had a great fascination with kind of the imagination. Kind of what Steiner what Jung talked about is like active imagination and his Red Book and so on. And then Steiner really talking about that we have these like higher centers of cognition, which he called inspiration, imagination, and intuition. I'm not sure if it's in that order, but yeah. And Steiner, really was an incredibly creative and imaginative thinker, and he really, kind of indexed all of his kind of discoveries to his own clairvoyance and his ability to kind of like see apparently into these kind of other worlds and read the Akashic record and so on. I'm curious, Walter, like what was your first introduction to Steiner? What was it about him that got you so excited?
I was in, thanks for the question and stop me. I was in a Gurdjieff group in Seacliff, Long Island, living at the house called the Pinnacle under Ernest Popoff, who had worked closely with Ouspensky when Ouspensky was in New York. And actually, we read some lecture by Steiner, which I think had no effect on me whatsoever. But at the time, I was a high school English teacher at public school, and there were a couple of people in the group who had Waldorf training and were Waldorf teachers. And when they spoke about education, I went, "Oh, it made sense." I was so used to, pedagogical gobbledygook, you know, and just this sense, and also impressed me. I was a high school teacher. In Waldorf education, it's not just lip service. The class teacher at the lower grades has the cred, more than the sense the high school. Well, that's important, and then they're just mommies there in the lower school. No, in Waldorf education, it's the teacher who stays with the children, in theory, still all the way from first grade to eighth grade. There's a lot of challenges to them now. People want the specialization, but as our friend Eugene Schwartz pointed out, it's really important when the children are going through puberty for the person who's accompanied them from the early grades to stay with them. And he's a proponent of really sticking, close to that pattern. But what I heard from these guys was and gals was something that made sense. That the child, first 7 years, it's the body that the human being is incarnating from above into the stream of physical evolution, which is coming from below. And the first 7 years, it's the body that's really there. The body is the most perfect part of us. And you can, through pure force, try to teach intellectually in those first 7 years. But if you do that, you're stealing from the body. You're going to have consequences later. You're going to have abnormality. Well, we won't use that term. But first 7 years is the development of the physical body. The next 7 years is the life body, the etheric body. And then only after 14, then you have the intellectual development that gets indicated. And then the fourth 7 years, that's when the real ego starts to come in. So this is a picture of we're trying to come into this physical world, and it's a gradual process. And the teacher's job is to be a handmaiden to that. And in the courses on education, he stresses these teachers. It's a calling, it's a spiritual calling, and they need to really be attuned to, or try to be attuned to, the incarnating soul.
So yeah, I mean, that's like, I think, a very important aspect of Steiner's kind of paradigm, his teaching. He really did believe in reincarnation. And I think he actually said somewhere that the mission of his life on Earth was to bring the knowledge of reincarnation back to the West. And that somehow we developed like monotheism and Christianity replaced like, the sort of pagan mystery school traditions. We lost this idea of like reincarnation, or what used to be called the transmigration of souls and so on. And my understanding is that Steiner believe that, that not only do human beings reincarnate again and again, but also the earth itself reincarnates. And that we're currently in, from his perspective, the fourth incarnation of the earth.
Yes.
And I got very fascinated with this when I was writing my book about Mesoamerican prophecies, 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl, or we published it as Quetzalcoatl Returns, where I discovered that a lot of these indigenous cultures speak in very similar ways. Like the Hopis say that we're in the fourth world and we're sort of on the cusp of the shift to the fifth world. Or the Aztecs talk about the age of the fifth sun and the age of the sixth sun, and we're exiting the age of the fifth sun now, entering the age of the sixth sun. And Steiner also associated these different incarnations of the earth with these different bodies. So he says, as you mentioned, Steiner believed that we didn't just have we had a number of bodies. Right now we have like the physical body, the etheric body, or the life body, which is like the energy body. Then we also have the astral body, and we have finally the I, or the ego. So we're at a point where we have these four bodies, and like when we go to sleep at night, I think Steiner talked about how the eye and the astral body detach from the physical body and the etheric body, and they go off and they visit these different astral worlds and get sort of replenished by the knowledge from the astral worlds and those experiences and so on. And that's what we remember as dreams in a certain sense. And yeah, I mean, Steiner also believed that we were approaching this next incarnation of the Earth, and we were actually in the process of developing, I think, a new body, if I remember correctly. I don't know, Ralph. Do you know anything about the new body that we're developing now, according to Steiner?
Well, I think we're developing the sentient soul in the future. We really need to develop our feeling self to a higher level. Well, that maybe is something that Walter could speak more about. But yeah, I think you painted a very clear picture there of Steiner's understanding of the subtle bodies and of the one, and I think it is correct that he did feel certainly that one of his most important missions was to return a correct and scrupulous understanding of karma and reincarnation to the West. It's not as if it belongs exclusively to Hinduism and Buddhism, but it's an integral part of the Western Esoteric Tradition. And, of course, he saw himself as part of a long lineage of deep people, initiates, you could call them, those who had known the deeper mysteries that had been celebrated in places like Delphi and other mystery centers in antiquity. So, yeah, I mean, Steiner, I have to say, we were just talking about it at the Goetheanum with Peter Salg, this remarkable contemporary writer and scholar of Steiner. But, Steiner's detailed portrayal of the journey of the soul between death and rebirth, which of course makes no sense unless you consider that we have those four bodies that you mentioned. It's extremely beautiful, extremely deep, and I think the most comprehensive account we yet have of what takes place after death. So that he certainly felt that was incredibly important. I mean, I mentioned at the outset the tremendous practical legacy he left in agriculture, education, etc. But most of his 6,000 lectures between 1901 and 1924 or 25, when he died, were devoted to these profound spiritual and esoteric matters. Answers. Yeah. So yeah, all of that.
We've gotten some great questions coming in, and we're going to go into all these questions in depth during the month-long seminar. And hi, Emmy. Hi, Cliff Quellick. So Emmy asks, what are the keystones of Steiner's understanding of Christianity and its role? So Steiner, I don't think he started out as a Christian, but through this esoteric exploration that he was making, he ended up becoming sort of an esoteric Christian, and he began to recognize that from his perspective, in terms of this evolutionary journey that humanity is on in the spiritual sense, Christ's incarnation represented for him like the sort of crucial threshold, which was like the full kind of instantiation of the I or the ego, which was sort of the separate self or the separate individuality, which is actually the big gain for this incarnation of the earth. And so when Christ says you have to leave your father, your brothers and sisters or whatever to follow me, he's sort of saying that you have to go through this path alone. And before that, in maybe indigenous cultures or more archaic cultures, there was a little more of a sense of like a group soul or a lot of group connectivity, and it became much more the sort of individuality kind of like hardened at that point. And Walter, you just disappeared into the ether, or maybe the astral. I'm not sure which. You'll be back in a second. But yeah, I understand that. So that stands to that. I know, Walter, do you want to elaborate on that a little bit in terms of Steiner's Christian understanding? Oh, we can't hear you right now. Try it again. No, still no sound. No sound. But yeah, I mean, it gets very elaborate in terms of how Steiner understood early Christianity and Christ's incarnation and all the forces around it. We'll get into some of that. I mean, as I said, Walter is much deeper in that, in those matters than I am. But in terms of the reincarnation, what part of a human gets carried into another life? That's also a very interesting and deep question for Steiner. he basically wrote a series of books called Karmic Relationships. And I think it's both this, these different bodies all reincarnate, but it can happen in different ways. Like he talked about sometimes like somebody between, death and rebirth, these sort of other angelic orders or spirits would maybe copy like your etheric body, and suddenly like 100 people would have your etheric body in the next incarnation, or your astral body, and so on. But then he also saw these kind of one-to-one correspondences. Like in those books, he tracked kind of like if you get into Tibetan Buddhism, you have these lamas who know who they were in the last cycle, and the last cycle, like somebody like the Dalai Lama, if you watch the film Kunda that Martin Scorsese did. And so Steiner believed that that was also happening in the modern Western civilization, but we just didn't know it because we'd lost our understanding of it or our belief in it. And so in his books, he would take somebody like Friedrich Engels or, Goethe, and he would show who that individuality had been in earlier incarnations, and how those different incarnations had helped them gain certain like soul capacity or skills, which then they needed for their next kind of bigger incarnation in a way. Um, let's see. And so Walter, when you were at Gertanium just now, was there any insight about the contemporary Steiner world? What did you
Oh,
discover
when
there?
I was there. Inside, yes, I mean, they're very aware that at least within Germany, Steiner continues to be something of a controversial figure. His work is immensely widespread, but there's a need to really stand up for Steiner. There have been some quite difficult attacks on him and his integrity over the years, of course. Whereas we know he was back in 1922 in Munich, he was attacked by the proto-Nazis. But of course, there were plenty of people who did not feel good about Steiner, from conservative elements from the Catholic Church to the proto-Nazis to other esoteric groups who felt that he was revealing too much of the deep wisdom of humanity. So, I think there's an awareness of needing to really stand up for Steiner's enormous integrity and spiritual depth and beauty, while acknowledging that there's some residue. You can't go through the German-speaking world in the 20th century without controversy. And so I think that's what I picked up. But, the other feeling you get from this impressive building, the Goetheanum, named after Goethe, the great German poet, dramatist, the author of Faust, and a comprehensive kind of genius in the German-speaking world before there was a Germany, in Weimar, when it was a collection of princely states. You get a sense of how international it has become. The anthroposophical doctors who meet from all over the world, the Waldorf teachers speak from all over the world. It's anthroposophical medicine. I visited the very beautiful, light-filled clinic of Ida Wegman, who was Rudolf Steiner's closest colleague, and he encouraged her to become a medical doctor in the early 20th century when that was rare for a woman. She has a very beautiful Ida Wegman clinic in Ascona on the shores of Lago Maggiore, next and very close to where we mentioned Jung here, where Eranos, the wonderful retreat centers on Lago Maggiore, where Jung met with all kinds of extraordinary people. Joseph Campbell, we would know, but Gerson Scholem, the great Kabbalist, D.T. Suzuki, the Zen master, on, and Mircea Eliade from the whole shamanistic world. So, it's that's Rudolf Steiner. He's a remarkable man.
Yeah, I mean, and one thing we'll talk about in our seminar, there's also a lineage that helps understand Steiner. And you mentioned Goethe and the Goetheanum. So Steiner actually, apparently he had this extraordinary visionary capacity from early childhood. I mean, the sense one gets as a psychedelic, person like myself who's done ayahuasca, DMT so many times, that when Steiner closed his eyes, it was like he was on an ayahuasca journey, and he would see into these other worlds, and these beings, and the spirits of the dead would visit him and so on. But he realized as a little child that actually nobody else around him had this ability. So he kind of shut up about it. Apparently he found one old gardener who possessed this kind of second sight or clairvoyance, and he could talk about that. The gardener was an illiterate sort of peasant, but he realized that somehow it had become like an atavistic capacity, that maybe a lot more people had had it in previous epochs of human development, but he just, for whatever reason, had this capacity that really wasn't generally available. And so then he decided not to speak about it when he was young, and he waited until he got a doctorate in philosophy, and he got a job researching and studying Goethe's science papers. And Goethe's approach to science, which was very much a kind of like trying to put the subjective experience of the human being back into science, and recognizing that kind of like what your output of scientific experiment or of a development of a technology is going to be based on your ideological set and setting. Walter is coming back. So that's all very fascinating. And, beyond that, we could go back to like Jacob Boehm, who was a mystic, and, kind of Agrippa, who was a magus, kind of Basil Valentinius, the Gnostic tradition. I mean, I think it's, when you read Steiner, when I encountered him during my own like psychedelic initiatory crisis, it seemed like kind of like out of nowhere. I couldn't believe that somebody thought like this. It was just so amazing and went in so many directions. And, but it was interesting later on to discover the sort of lineages behind him, Swedenborg and, Jacob Boehm and Goethe and so on. Walter, welcome back. We've gotten some questions, which is always a good sign. Let's see. Daniel, you're aware of the cultural and political scene. I would love to have your opinion of Steiner's threefold social order. So I actually have always meant to go back and dig into that more. Walter, do you want to speak to that a little bit?
I can say very little. It tends to be, it's not a formula. At the most basic level, you would say it's a restructuring of society so that you have a complete separation of the three spheres of rights, economics, and culture. Culture includes religion and education and all that. Rights, of course, is law and courts and all that. And the economics is the economics. What we have now, as you know, is economics, and economics. But from this threefold social order, the principles are complete freedom in the cultural sphere, complete equality in the rights sphere, and then in the economic sphere, get ready, brotherhood. Now that sounds to be pie in the sky-ish, but remember that Steiner was in no way a utopian, but it was really saying that until we recognize that all money represents value in the sense of labor, of work, meaningful work that someone does. And so an appreciation has to change. Now, right now, there are lots of experiments going on in various places. I mean, the B Corporation, as an example, and other experiments. And then there's differences with respect to land use, which I think there are many people have rethought. The idea of money becoming congealed and being an abstract entity that people can kind of store and not use, that was not part of of threefolding.
No. Thank you, Walter. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't say more, but that's
we have a wonderful question, one that's definitely always on my mind, from Emmy. And Emmy, I really hope you're going to take the seminar because you're killing it with your questions here. But she writes, there was a pipeline of Christians to MAGA, to following Trump and so on, via Jordan Peterson, who often quotes Jung and uses the Bible to explore psychological concepts behind human behavior. I'm wondering what role Jung and Steiner's Christianity can have as a new pipeline that doesn't lead to Christian nationalism or white supremacy and so on, but rather opens to a more complex Christian ideology, or maybe theophany would be a word that we could think about there. Either of you want to give that one a shot, or Ralph, you have anything to
Yeah,
leave?
yes. Well, one of the things that Steiner would say is that fundamentalism in any form, whether it's Christian, Jewish, Buddhist, you name it, is a regressive force. When he spoke about the contrary powers we would have to deal with in the 20th, 21st century, religious fundamentalism was one of them. So he certainly doesn't identify what happened 2,000 years ago with any specific religion or any specific church. This is a universal human phenomenon that he would see through gazing with spiritual insight into the evolution of humanity. But I think, yes, it's essential now for us to find a kind of holistic spirituality that doesn't fall into the Christian nationalism, the dominionism, the regressive outlook of so many, not all, but so many evangelicals, and their mistaken view of what Christianity is. So, I think Steiner would say it's time to reconnect with the mystery. He called it the mystery of Golgotha. We're still figuring out the mystery of what happened 2,000 years ago in the Middle East, although it's obviously related to universal love and freedom. But he would say that it's time for a holistic. The early years of Christianity, before it was established as the imperial religion by Constantine, it was a Gnostic. It was he sometimes calls it a mystery Christianity. The figure of Christ was not the crucified figure on the cross. It was, if you go to the Roman catacombs, it was Christ as as Orpheus, as the shepherd, with the good and a young man in a shepherd's tunic carrying a lamb on his shoulders. So he would say, yes, it's time for a reinvigorated, multicultural, non-progressive Christianity that is aligned with all the world's spiritual traditions.
Yeah, and I would say, more of a kind of initiatory. I mean,
Yeah.
the current Christianity, the mainstream evangelical type, is really about an indoctrination structure where you're supposed to have faith. You're saved, quote unquote, by having faith in
Yeah.
Christ's divinity. Whereas
Right.
for Steiner and other esoteric thinkers like Gurdjieff, that's not really the point. Christ is more like a model of how to walk the path. And actually, that statue in the Gortenium that you mentioned, Steiner also writes about these different kind of like, you could call them beings, or, St. Paul called them powers and principalities, these kind of energies that work on the human being all of the time. And he identified two of them. He kind of took in the reductive Bible, as it was reduced, when it was made mainstream, was talks about the devil or Satan, but Steiner kind of like expands that into these different forces that work on us all the time, and two of the main ones that he identified were the Ahrimanic and the Luciferic. And so Lucifer is actually the root meaning of that is light bringer. So in some ways, Lucifer is a very positive spur to human development. And in fact, I think Steiner had a magazine that he called Lucifer Gnosis. So Lucifer is this force that kind of like pulls us up towards like beauty and genius, but also can make us very arrogant and haughty. Psychedelics can be very Luciferic. Burning Man can be Luciferic. I mean, somebody like Rimbaud, was like a Luciferic kind of artist or whatever, and sort of, maybe possessed by a spirit of genius in a way. Then you have this other force, which is the Ahrimanic, which, as much as the Luciferic is kind of pulling us up and away from the earth, the Ahrimanic is pulling us down towards kind of minerality, sterility, technology, in a sense, death, extinction. And, Steiner felt that, Christ was showing us the path between these opposing forces. And also Steiner believed that, after his death, potentially in this period that we're in now, there was going to be a sort of event in humanity's spiritual history that he talked about as the incarnation of Ahriman, and that actually that being of rational empiricism, pure calculation, like pure technological materialism, was actually going to kind of incarnate in our human realm. And it does feel, and Walter, I'm curious what you think. It does feel like we're heading towards something like that. It feels like a very Ahrimanic time right now.
this is Ahriman's time. There's no certainty. Some say, he's incarnating in the West. He's already here. He may be a youth, but it's at this is Ahriman's day, and not for a reason. Is because these opposing forces are here for us to overcome them. We have to meet these challenges, and the temptations are towards either. You can talk about, and Steiner talks about moral technology. Now, that may mean moral use of technology, but it also refers to technology that's connected to man's being. He talked about in Atlantean times, human beings had control over life forces, and it was in part, that's in the Old Testament, the abuse of those forces that led to the downfall of
Yeah,
Atlantis.
Walter, let me just explain for a second, because not everybody may understand that. So basically, Steiner, as I understand it, believed that humanity had existed not only in these different worlds, but in these kind of different states of consciousness and sort of state dimensions in a weird way. And so he talked about Atlantis and Lemuria, but the way he talked about it was not in a very literalistic way. Maybe like Graham Hancock would say there was like a pre-existing, Atlantis that had like columns and big structures and so on. It was more like almost like a different state of being, a more kind of subtle level of consciousness where we had different capacities, and somehow we developed to a certain point, and then we sort of lost control of that situation, or there was a deviation or something, and then a collapse back into this more physicalized or materialized form. Would you say that is true?
Yeah, that's good. I mean, it was in the middle of Atlantis that we began to have a body that in some way resembled the one we have now. Before that, the Earth was still more pliant. We were not incarnated in the way we are now. Individuality was not a possibility, and but we were still in contact with real life forces and could wield them. There were vehicles, there were structures, but the intelligence was not incarnated individually.
Yeah. So
To
this is something I'm excited to explore during the seminar. It's kind of like there's that thing where for many people, if not most people, Steiner just becomes like too woo, you know, like it begins to feel too like woo woo, and somebody who has like a rational, kind of empirical mindset is going to say, oh, that's just like too freaky for me. I have no idea what they're talking about. And for me, I find so much resonance with Steiner, even when he gets very esoteric, even though sometimes I take it almost as a mythopoetic kind of a thing, or a so but I into, I mean, I don't know, how do you do you experience this through your own kind of like direct clairvoyant encounters with Steiner's thought or visions, or
One of the things we'll be exploring in our, I think it's the second session, is the evolution of consciousness, which is such an important concept because, we have the false view that cavemen looked out into the world and saw plants and trees and animals the same way we do and saw the same colors. Whereas for Steiner, there's a gradual incarnation into a solid earth. But before that, there were times when nature still had will in it. I'm going to talk about that, to some extent on Saturday. Nature still had will in it. We experience, and this is in indigenous cultures, native cultures. They didn't go around, giving multiple choice, saying, a little running bear behind that tree there is a spirit or this that. It was still experienced. The remnants of that kind of consciousness was still there. And it made sense to them that to go up to the eagle's nest gave you a power when you came back with that eagle feather. What the theory was something that they still felt in their bones. And it's one of the reasons why you could say the indigenous peoples didn't invent stuff. They weren't about to invent a steam engine, or the like, because they were still nature things were still alive to for us, and this, I wanted to go back to this, we're in the consciousness soul age, which follows the intellectual soul and the sentient soul. And for us, the outer world is pretty much dead. that we accept it. We incarnate into this world where there's just solid stuff out there, and our senses give us pictures, but the life behind them is not there for us. But of course, for Steiner, those capacities can be cultivated, and that's part of what Steiner brought was these practices. But the conscious soul age is an age in which we are refining and transforming the astral body, which is our emotional life. And for people in general in this consciousness soul age, started in the 1400s, goes to 2200, we've got a part of us that's transformed, that we're present to. We have thoughts that are alive. We can think. We have control of our attention. And we have the other parts, the darker parts that still need a lot of work, which is the egoism, the narcissism, the greed, all that stuff. But the task of this time is that transforming of the astral body. The next one is going to be transformation of the life body, the ether body. And then the next one will be the transformation finally of the physical body, at which point beings will actually be creators, will have control, but a lot of moral development has to take place in the meantime.
No, very, very beautiful. Very, very well said. Yeah, I mean, I wanted to mention, by the way, if new people have tuned in, you can go to liminal.news and read about the course and what we're doing every week. And you can use a coupon at the checkout, AwakeningSoul, for 25% off the seminar. I hope you guys will join. It's going to be super fun. And yeah, personally, I just feel like, I mean, you mentioned greed and all that stuff. I mean, we're definitely seeing massive projections of the worst of human nature right now. And, so it feels like a very precious time to really, go into a thinker like this. And, I guess I also wanted to talk about, and we only have a few minutes left, kind of for me, actually, I was surprised by, and once again, we'll keep sort of rotating around kind of how do you, kind of square these crazy, in a way, visionary, kind of ideas that Steiner has about, the nature spirits and the Buddha incarnating on Mars and, the many bodies that Christ had and stuff with a sort of modern, rational kind of way of being in the world. And, there's some thinkers who've helped me a lot with that. One of them is William Irwin Thompson, and his way of approaching Steiner I found to be extremely powerful. But yeah, I mean, so, Steiner also, he kind of laid out the table for his future work in his first book, this dissertation, Philosophy of Freedom, which was actually a kind of refutation, I think a very successful refutation of Kantian dualism.
Right.
And Steiner actually defined himself as a monistic idealist, which is essentially this idea that the consciousness, not anything physical or material, is the underlying ground of reality, the underlying nature of being, which is also what Eastern metaphysics talks about. Like Tibetan Buddhism talks about primordial awareness and everything sort of arising from this ground of this primordial awareness. So then he layers onto that in a sense, a kind of animism or panpsychism, aware of these forces behind everything in nature and these sort of angelic and elemental beings who kind of sculpt and kind of emanate, these different aspects of reality and so on. And then he elaborates on top of that these evolutionary cycles, how humanity was, so different in previous stages of development and how we'll be very different again in future stages, and gives a kind of necessity to understanding, where we're at now and with all the difficulties that we're facing. So he kind of I feel that for me, he was the primary thinker who kind of restored kind of meaning and purpose and kind of a sort of centrality of an understanding of what it means to be human and why we're going through all this this source, as you might say.
It's great, Daniel, but I want to add one little piece to it, which is human consciousness. And remember, a lot of Nobel Prize winning physicists agree with this. Human consciousness is central to the whole evolution of the cosmos. The idea that, some have said, oh yeah, wouldn't it be great if humanity disappeared because the earth would be so much better off? No, there's no out there. That's the dualism. There's
Right.
the spiritual world. There's no separation of inner and outer. There has to be complete knowledge there. And so the picture is one in which we are essential to the cosmos, and our interplay with spiritual beings is essential not only to us but to them. And this picture of the evolution of consciousness is important because it's showing why we're in this particular pickle right now, where the whole thing, why did the spiritual world have to die out for us? Why do we have to go through this period of desolation? And of course, the reason.
Why, Walter? Why? Tell me why.
I can tell you why. One.
You'll find out if you come to the workshop.
Oh yeah, should I tell him or should I say no?
No.
On Saturday.
All right, make that a cliffhanger. We'll make that a cliffhanger. I want to know.
I'll give you half of it. One half of it is freedom. When you were in earlier stages of humanity's development and the gods were real to you and you felt their pleasure or wrath and you felt that the winds were alive beings and all that, you are nothing. The spiritual world was overwhelming. Your individuality was still up in the group soul, had not really incarnated. And so in a way, the whole thing had to be dumbed down for us to develop our own being, so that we could really become what we're meant to become. We were overwhelmed. So that's half. The other half we get on Saturday.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, okay, good. Well, Ralph, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd just like to add a few thoughts before we sign off. I think it's important for us to realize that Steiner's an enormous thinker. He's got one of the biggest minds I've ever come across, and it takes a long time to fully absorb the massive scope of what he has to offer. It's important too that he doesn't expect anybody to buy into any kind of ideology. He says, do not swallow hook, line, and sinker some of his insights from the spiritual world. He says, subject everything to the full critical capacities of your intellect bit by bit and make it your own. And he doesn't want to be any kind of a guru. He just says he's your spiritual or our spiritual friend. So I think it's important that people, this big picture, it's something you can come to bit by bit, piece by piece, as it progressively makes more sense. But I don't think people should feel that they have to embrace any particular worldview or ideology. I think they can come. He's a thinker of extraordinary rigor and knowledge. Remember, he is a PhD in philosophy, and he was trained in math and physics in Vienna. So you're dealing with a brilliantly comprehensive mind that's extremely philosophically and scientifically rigorous, and is at the same time attuned to some of the profound pictures of human evolution and higher worlds that Walter was talking about there.
Can I throw in another 25 cents worth?
Throw in 50 cents.
Oh, we'll go for 50 cents. I mean, on the one hand, Steiner, he went to the equivalent of MIT in Austria. He was trained as a scientist and an engineer. But he said that, so he stressed ordinary thinking, that, clear, intelligible, logical thinking, absolutely essential. On the other hand, he said, our ordinary thoughts are the corpses of the thinking that we experienced in the spiritual world before we incarnated. And we need to develop our thinking again towards, living thinking, or what he also called heart thinking. That's important to grasp at it. It's not super AI thinking. It's Georg Kuhlmann developed the term cognitive feeling. It's a knowing. It's a knowing that includes both the heart and the concept. Maybe we can explore that more, but that's essential. When he gave his verses, they weren't. You weren't meant to. They're not there to be explained.
Yeah.
But he would give verses, and it was kind of like, try this on. Like you went to Barney's, so try on this jacket, try this thought and see where living with it will take you, because his ideas are of that nature that you're not. It's not. If you're going to stick with logical thinking, you're gonna be stuck with Ahriman.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, I think it's for me, it's really important because it's like a lot of people I know who are in the sort of, Burning Man, transformational culture, yoga and all this stuff. There's there's a kind of rejection of the intellect because people went to college and they when they look back, they were like, what was all that, these stupid courses? It all seems kind of meaningless. But I think, yeah, I mean, what we're kind of saying here is that, Steiner he called himself a spiritual scientist, but it really was about, uniting in a proper integrative way, mind and heart, and understanding that our thinking is also a spiritual tool and capacity that we need to hone, in the same way we might hone our body in yoga. Not that I do that right now, but I should. So I think that's very important. Let's see this one comment here. We're about to check out, I think, for today, but some kind of right understanding of karma and reincarnation is helpful to creating less pressure and bigger picture. Steiner gets that. It's a peacemaker move. The heart continues. The thinking gets composted. That's a nice way of looking at it. But I hope you guys who joined us today, and I'm going to put this up on my newsletter. So hopefully, a lot of people will get a chance to listen. I hope you guys will all join this seminar. I think we're going to have a great time. And if you are in New York or anywhere nearby, you can come in person to the Anthroposophy Center and join us.
138 West 15th Street.
Yeah, that's like I think we're doing 2 p.m. What is it? No, 4 p.m.
4 p.m.
4
Yeah.
p.m.
4 p.m. 4 to 6.
This time I have to leave like super on the dot at 6 for something, but later on we'll be able to linger more and have dinner after and stuff like that.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you guys.
Thank you, Daniel.
See you on
Thanks for
Saturday.
hosting, Daniel.
What's that?
Mary Stewart Adams will be joining us on Saturday.
Oh, amazing. I can't wait to meet her. That'll be awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Okay, bye. See you Saturday.
Hey.
Bye.
Ciao, ciao.
Hey.